Thank you all for joining our first one training session. This is a long time coming. We've kind of working with the teams internally to handpick every single class that we'll be teaching on a weekly basis. So today we're keeping it off to lunch. It won't be every single class. We'll try. I'll try what I do. We have like 4 p.m. like some more. But so today we're going to kick off with live ROI. So I think before we start deep diving into digital and getting into those one-on-one sessions, we really wanted to give everyone a foundation of ROI. I know you guys have probably sat through meetings before, probably held by Linda and her team, but starting in September, we're actually rolling out 2.0 version of live ROI. You guys are getting a sneak peek of that. Just to kind of explain to you the whole planning process, and we're going to help point out points where digital really plays a role. As you're going to see, it plays a role now in all facets of the planning stages. So I think with that, we'll kick it off to Linda.
Okay. I see a lot of familiar faces. My name is Linda Fitzsimmons. I lead the New York organization here. So I'm Managing Director of New York. But for the first 8 years of my career here at Zenith, I led the Verizon team. I was on the Verizon team. And it was an exciting time at that time because we were consolidating much of Verizon's business here at Zenith. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but the planning, the national planning was done at Universal McCann, and the direct response was done at another agency as well as multicultural. And a few years ago, it was an opportunity to bring it all together. And just simultaneously, we were launching Live ROI. And Live ROI was a global initiative that was near and dear to Steve King, and he was pushing it down within the U.S., but globally. And we needed to translate what that meant. What is Live ROI, and what does that mean for us here in the U.S.? So I worked with many of the faces here and some of leaders that are in our organization to build a process, and we called it the 10 Steps to Live. We thought that if we could build what we call the perfect plan, if we could build this perfect plan, and it went through these 10 steps, and if you had all the time in the world and could deep dive into these 10 steps, you could actually build the perfect ideal plan. And we just wanted to dimensionalize that for teams and showcase to teams what that would look like. So I started this journey, and I started this process, and the most interesting part I learned outside of Verizon, because 8 years I spent on Verizon, but then I took on more of this role across the strategy department. I realized every team within the organization, every strategy team, was actually defining Live ROI differently. And they went through the process very differently. So these 10 steps, I thought, really start to help ground everyone in just a way to think about the business. Now, I worked on Verizon for a long time, so I know sometimes we don't have time to go through the 10 steps. Sometimes we scratch the surface on 2 or 3 that we need to do in order to get it done. But I do know in an annual planning process, we try and go through all these steps. So I'm going to talk to you today about and give you the sneak peek of what we're calling Live ROI 2.0 because we haven't really rolled it out to the agency yet. So I would love feedback from your groups here. I would also love if there's any volunteers. We're working on the curriculum over the summer, so if Live Insights is a passion that you have and you want to participate, I'm going to talk to you about some exciting tools that we're going to be rolling out. And I want this to be dynamic, so please feel free to ask questions, and I'll take it away. Okay, so we are the agency who put ROI on the map, and when we talk about what does that really mean, I think what we're trying to better define, and this really started 20 years ago when Zenith spun off from Saatchi, became the first media agency. To do that. I think we are grounded in our client solutions, so always bringing back to them a measurement framework of how we're going to measure results and then showing what those results look like. So ROI is important. It's even in our logo, so that's how important it is. So as I just mentioned, this overall challenge, I mean, digital used to be a line item on our flowcharts, and now it has transformed every medium within our industry. And it's top of mind for every client, and they're talking about how digital, they need to get with a digital agent, and digital needs to transform, and how it's going to transform their business. And we believe it starts with consumer behavior. So you'll see much of what we focus on is around the consumer, even some of the visualization that we've come up with. And when you look at the consumer, there is a plethora more of touch points that we all now have access to, as opposed to, it's not linear anymore. And even when we talk about the consumer journey, our consumer journey used to be the pathways approach, and it was this linear 8-phase process, and it went from everything to start awareness, build your awareness amongst your consumers, to purchase, and it was this linear process. And we know through mobile and social that that's no longer how consumers interact with brands. So we need to evolve as the consumer is evolving. And so we kind of came up with, and this is what we're working on, and it says draft on purpose because we have not finalized this, but we're trying to come up with our clear story and positioning. And we feel that within Zenith that Live ROI really differentiates us because we start with these live insights, so we leverage live data to anticipate changes in consumer behavior. But we feel strongly that we need to focus on the whole consumer journey. And so many times I've heard from teams, well, my client has a social agency, I don't need to look at social. It's like, no, you do. You need to understand what your consumer is saying and what their passions are. And as you're building out consumer profiles, it's really important that you're incorporating those social insights. So we can't live in this siloed world of, this agency manages that, and my client doesn't care about, social, but they need to, and we need to show them the relevance of that. And then I talked a little bit about focusing on the overall experience, but then I would say we have such an entrepreneurial spirit here at Zenith. I feel like we're always trying to try new things, and for our clients, we're always bringing them new unconventional things and partnerships, and I think we need to continue to do that because I think that also helps our speed to market, and our speed to market on Verizon I know is crazy, especially these days. So Live ROI talked a little bit about the history of why we thought we needed to build 10 steps out and what our overall approach was. But it's never been more relevant than today. And I've been working very closely with the global team, and they have an amazing wealth of, if I can call it, training materials that they have shared with me. And over the next course of the next 8 weeks, we're going to deep dive into what we're calling the Evolve 10 steps to talk about, in the U.S., what works for us. So I'm going to share some of that with you. And consumer, of course, being in the center, but the 3 phases. Is everyone familiar with the 3 phases? Are you familiar with the 3 phases to Live ROI? So I'll just kind of go quickly through it. Active understanding, I think in this step here, we're mining insights. So some people refer to these as like the 4 C's of looking at the category and the consumer, and so when you competitive, and then marketplace like conditions of what's going on. But I think we've also simplified it into, we're trying to garner in this step some live insights in addition to some of the traditional resources that we've tapped into to really leverage, to really understand what's going on right now. And I've been working very closely with Rob Jason, who is our Chief Data Officer, and we're working on some tools. We're actually working on a tool, and I see Alan here in front here, in regards to Blue Kai. Blue Kai, we're partnering with them right now, and we're looking at an insight tool. So we're calling it our Target Insight tool for the time being until we can brand it. And it's really going to help us uncover some live insights on maybe some lookalike targets or some just scaling different audiences, like what's the next best audience we should go after. And BlueSky is a great partner because they're owned by Oracle. We have that client relationship, and it's an opportunity to beta test some of these tools. So if anyone, you guys from a planning standpoint, MRI, Simmons, those are all of our traditional survey-based data. So what consumers say they're doing, not actually what they're doing, but what they're telling the survey that they're doing, versus this is behavioral data. This is what they're actually doing, and us digging into that data as opposed to just relying on what they say, which they totally lie. They absolutely lie. Okay, so phase two is about dynamic engagement. It's really taking those insights and it's connecting it to your strategy, right? So we're going to talk a little bit in this next phase, and I have the Evolve 10 steps that I'll reveal in a minute. But we're going to talk about how we do that through things like creating an organizing idea, and what does that mean? So this is a way for us to help optimize the overall process as well. And then lastly, real-time measurement is the last phase of our process, and it's really like, at the end of the day, we are the ROI agency, so we need to be able to better understand our KPIs. So what is our clients measuring as success for us? But then from a live standpoint, there could be interim KPIs. I tell this Verizon story often. It's a pretty old story now, so I don't know if it's as relevant to the team here. But a few years ago, I think it was McGarry Bowen had launched this horrible campaign around Mother's Day. Okay, it was around Mother's Day. It was the mother and the daughter in an ad, and they're in the wireless store, and the daughter is crying, and you can't understand what she's saying because there's just subtitles. There's subtitles, so you know what she's saying through the subtitles, but you can't understand it because she's like sobbing. And it was so annoying to the consumer that we went on through our brand watch at the time and looked at some of the conversations that were happening, and consumers were so annoyed by it that we actually had to go to the client and say, if we don't do something about this, like, we're going to miss the Mother's Day window. In our world, it's like 2 weeks, right? So we're going to miss that opportunity. So just a way that you can come up with these, we can call them interim performance measures to kind of get a pulse on what consumers are saying they're doing. And that obviously can't happen with integrations, and integration is critical throughout the whole process, and it's critical, and I know how much integration is critical on VM1 because you guys live and breathe together as one unit, so I don't need to belabor that point. So step by step, when we talk about this process, 2.0 will be the vision that we're rolling out in September. So you guys are getting the sneak preview. We have our 3 phases, but then 10 steps is what we've evolved to. And when I first started, Sean Healy is our global lead from a planning standpoint, and I worked very closely with him on some of this. And he came to me and said, well, we have 18 steps. We have 18 steps in the UK that we go through. And I said, I can get people to do 10 steps. There's no way I'm going to get them to do 18 steps. So we have to figure this out. So it was like 3 conference calls that we had, and we came up with what we're calling the Evolve 10 steps. So I don't know if I have to say this, but the first step is really defining, and it's not on here, but it's defining your overall objective. So we're assuming at this point you already have your objectives and how your client is measuring success and all that good stuff. But when you're given sort of this campaign brief or your client's talking to you about launching a new device, we want you to think about these Evolve 10 steps. And it starts from framing the challenge. And the training that we're going to go through in September is actually going to take these 10 steps, and we're going to break it down into weekly forums. And it'll be, spread out so it's not too daunting. But we have a bunch of exercises that we can go through to what's the best way to frame the challenge, so that way the teams will have templates on, what's the best visualization and what does that look like. So that way we can drive some consistency across the organization on what that should be. So it starts with framing the challenge and then identifying consumer and category insights. We used to have that as 2 steps. We've kind of merged that together. Prioritize jobs to be done. So that's an interesting one. That's a little bit global speak. So I put in parentheses, remove barriers. It's sort of like, what's your way in with your consumer? What's the best way to really resonate? And, is there sort of a white space from a competitive standpoint where you can stand out? Or is there a consumer insight that you need to kind of, dig into? I think it's kind of just understanding what's the job to be done here with this campaign. And then lastly, moving insights to strategy. So those are the first 4 steps, and you'll see what we're calling outputs or outcomes. Let's see it as outcomes too. We would love every plan to have a visualization of a consumer journey, and you don't necessarily have to showcase what we're going to show you in a minute, which is the CX loop. If you have a better visualization of the consumer journey, we're good with that too, but it's a strategic picture of this overall journey that your consumer is going through, and if you can identify the barrier on that journey, we think that's sort of ideal. So that would be the vision there. And then the second output or outcome is around an organizing idea. So we have lots of insights that we kind of mine through, but at the end of the day, it needs to ladder up to an organizing idea. So I have an example, and I can show you the visualization of that. And it just needs to have a brief description and then a few strategic things that you're going to focus on and how that sort of ladders up. The next phase was dynamic engagement that we talked to. I know you guys are familiar. I saw an open session going on yesterday with an open session, which is our ideation session. That's our branded way of ideating. I'm working on a tool right now, which I know Greg has been helping, Greg Harson has been helping us gather some Verizon data for that tool. But we're calling it our CX channel mix tool. And the interesting thing about this tool is, in the past, wasn't really built on, it was built on touch points data, so it was looking at influence. This is now grounded in econometrics data, it's social response data, brand tracking data. So we're trying to get our hands on a bunch of this data, but the whole premise is many of our clients want here and now, today, they want to know, how many growth ads am I going to get? What is this going to do? How I want it the immediate, but they don't look at the long-term impact of what they're doing and how they're eroding the brand if they only focus on today. So this tool will allow us to balance multiple objectives. So we can always tell them about today and the call to action and what they need to drive today, but we need to reserve dollars to make sure that we are protecting the brand in the future, and so we may have to look at things like, social efforts, engagement efforts, as well as, some branding support out there in the marketplace. So we're working through that. That will be previewed in September, so we'll have that ready for September. And then September's going to be a big month around here. I feel like everything's happening in September. And then content ideation planning. So content ideation planning is, it's bigger than the campaign, right? It's building up to your content strategy. And I know on Verizon sometimes we do content audits, so that might be relevant. And through this, I haven't mentioned digital per se, but digital is infused in every step of this process. It's not here's the digital strategy. It's the overarching strategy, and I just think when we think about the consumer, we think about how they're going about their day and how digitally led most of our audiences are, so we just need to be mindful of that. So Dynamic engagement, the two outputs there are content strategy and this brand experience map. I have a few examples for you, so I'll breeze through them really quickly, but I just want to spend a little time on this slide just talking about the 10 steps that we're going to deep dive into, and then we're going to showcase, and we'll have workshops where we're actually building these outputs together. And I think the biggest, most valuable feedback I got from the training last time was around the fact that the teams wanted to bring their client challenges to meetings, and that we actually use real-life examples and client work, like current client issues that we need to solve on. That way, they could leave the training with the answers to get back to their clients, which I love, because I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I think that's the most useful feedback I've gotten on the whole program, which is great. So the last step in dynamic engagement is lead an asset and connection session. I think this is important because we're going to talk a little bit about brand experience maps. Sometimes when we lay out the brand experience maps, we realize, and our clients realize, we don't have content for all of this stuff. And if we're driving consumers to different places, we need to make sure that we have the right messaging. And so sometimes it can really identify where those gaps are. So we think that asset session could be really important to dig into there. And then I won't belabor real-time measurement. That's kind of the backbone of what we are, how we're delivering on our goals. We're going to do this through a measurement framework. So this is going to be another area where we have templates, so that way you guys can use what works for you and customize as you guys need to customize. And then transforming data into actual future insights. I mean, you guys are leading edge when it comes to having your DMP up and running, working through attribution models. I feel like Verizon is the poster child for everything. Right? Okay. All right, so these are just like some mock-ups, if I can call them mock-ups. I just wanted to throw them out there for maybe some inspiration until we get to September. So we're going to introduce the CX loop. I challenged the CX loop with the global team a little bit, and they came back to me and said, this is an irrefutable process. And I kind of bought it after they put the slide together for me, so I figured I'd share it with you. So they just said, like, all brands have buyers and non-buyers, and you can't talk to them the same. You have to talk to them differently, which I agree with. And then the marketing task, like, you can't have the same task. You can't ask them to do the same thing in order to acquire and retain, so you might have to have different strategies for that. And then building awareness and consideration needs to happen before purchase, so I bought that for $1 too. And then the last thing was retaining buyers involves brand enjoyment and reconsideration before hopefully repeat purchase. So I thought these felt very logical, right? So then they shared the CX, and this was the CX loop. And you're going to see this in a lot of presentations. I like to use it not to talk about the journey, because this still feels a little linear to me. I'm just being honest with the team, because it feels like you have to consider it before you buy it and then enjoy it. But we know the way the world works, and we know that sometimes our customers are enjoying our content. So why does it have to be this linear loop? So I like to use this as a visualization in a presentation to identify a challenge or a barrier or an issue where you need to point out that we're having problems with people considering our brand, and here's why. And so I think it works really well from that standpoint. So I think it's a good visualization to tell a story. So that's how we've been using it, and that's how we've been selling it in. Won't belabor this, but in summary, it helps leverage and it helps with a pictorial view of the job to be done. And I talked a little bit about this already. So what we've done is we've taken those spots on the CX loop, so consideration, enjoy, buy, And we actually developed this tool, and we're working with a partner called Point Logic, and we meet weekly with them to talk about how we're optimizing it, what that tool looks like. The most exciting part for me is this tool will work across all brands within the building, because if the clients don't have data, we're going to have norms, and we'll be able to look at category norms. Nine is helping us with some of that. We have touch points, and we have multiple categories, so we can dive into that. So I love the fact that it's open-ended and it will work for any client. So Verizon down to Delta, it could be a good, useful tool, and we'll talk more about that in the future.
I got a quick question,
Sure.
Linda. This is great, by the way. Where do you envision advocacy falling into the mix? Because I feel like we're covering maybe there's a lot of there's an evolution on the Verizon side from a digital perspective to look at influence and advocacy as well and also loyalty. I guess is my question.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's in the enjoy
yeah,
area?
I think it would fall into the enjoy area, and the way I've been thinking about this is like enjoy is that two-way sort of dialogue where we're getting feedback from consumers and we're kind of pushing things out and they're kind of sharing back with us. So that's kind of where I would put that. And same thing with like CRM and loyalty programs. Like I think, that's kind of in the spectrum. But that's a good point. It's like I think you customize, and that was the other thing. I was like, the only way these visualizations work is if you have the ability to customize it. So if you're trying to tell your story and it's all about loyalty, I would change that little enjoy to loyalty. Do you know what I mean? And so I wanted to make sure that when we built everything, it would be modular in nature so the teams could adapt.
And then we could change it to advocacy.
If
the goal is
exactly.
to develop influencers.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And so what the tool will help us do is, it says like 60% joy, 30% consider, 10% traffic, buy, right? That is sort of an output of what the tool will be. So you'll go through a series of questions and you'll come up with a hypothesis, but then based on the data that you fueled the tool with, it will help prioritize based off of past campaigns. So pretty exciting. We'll get more into it when we do the formal training and have the demos. All right, so organizing ideas. This is the second output that we talked about. And I just put in a brief description here on why it's useful for you guys to have. And then I just wanted to show, there's a few points of visualization. Some people talk about the sweet spot between the branded category insight versus the cultural insight versus the consumer insight. And so some teams talk about sweet spot, and they use this from a global standpoint. I like this version where you kind of talk about the brief description. So it's like the little tweet on the left-hand side, and then maybe 2 or 3 rules of engagement of what this big idea has to ladder up to. So whichever works for your clients. But the purpose of the training that we're going to go through is to, how do you get to this? What tools do you have to tap into, and how are you going to mine those 10 steps, and what's behind there to kind of be able to get to this one page? Because there's a crap load of work that gets to this one page, right? Okay. So from a global standpoint, they were talking about an organizing idea, and we were talking about, and sometimes there's a language barrier, because when we talk about a client brief, we talk about a client brief as being something that the client has given Zenith to brief us on what they're doing. When you talk about a client brief from a global standpoint, which I learned this, and this took me 3 meetings to kind of really understand this. What they're saying is they're building out a brief. They're actually taking all of what they've learned and they're building out the brief, because what they're going to do is show the brief to the partners. So it's interesting. When you think about client brief as a brief to us, they think of it as something that they have to create internally to educate their clients. So or to educate the marketplace, I should say. So they're actually coming up with, so I just wanted to share this as could be interesting for us. But there's almost like a website that you can kind of go through, almost like a checklist, under active understanding of all the different things that you have to go through. And there's some good visualizations of, okay, here's like 5 insights that I came up with. And so it's great to kind of get to what that organizing idea is. So I tell you that it exists. Haven't really tapped into it yet, but that's part of my summer plan. Content strategy. I don't have a lot here, and this is because I'm not sure if there's 5 essential outputs or if there's 4, because I think content strategies are really important, but I think it doesn't always fit within an annual plan. I think content strategies, for me, are more macro, where you develop the content strategy through the content audit, and then your plans have to ladder up to that. But I just don't know if every plan, because this is like, if we're talking about the 5 essential outcomes of every plan, that's saying that every plan should have a content strategy, and I don't know if that's necessarily relevant. So that's why we're going to go through the training, and then we're going to it's going to be an evolution, and we're going to work it in real time, and it might work for some clients, it might not work for others. But I thought this was a really good visualization of how, for Nestle, they're laddering up to this one overarching, your family's everyday fuel, and everything that they produce, which I think on Verizon, I don't think they're there with a content strategy. I just think if they had some level of a content strategy where everything that they produce ladders up to this bigger vision, that would save a lot of time, right? Sweet, right? Okay, experience maps. So these are brand experience maps. I mentioned this earlier. So every plan has a flow chart. We all live and die by the flow chart, right? But we were thinking brand experience maps can live right after the flow chart, and they could be a great visual diagram of how the campaign is going to work, and it's going to force us to all be working more cohesively and collectively together to make sure that we have content for all that we're producing. So Visio is the tool that, and I think passion of yours, you've used this in the past.
Yeah, Visio is awesome.
Yeah, right? And the best part, this is the best part. So the global team, they're working on creating all these assets that live sort of like in this little section on the left-hand side of the Visio screen. And it's literally a drag and drop. So if you need an icon for a television, you just drag it and drop it. Solid lines mean one thing, dotted lines mean another. So it's already set up for us. So we'll just need like the icon, like little like legend on what means what, or we can create it for ourselves. But they're producing it all. So they're working through that, and they're going to share that out with us. But I'm excited that it will save a tremendous amount of time, because I will show you on the next few slides, like, this is kind of what you kind of go through in terms of each content point. You talk about how are you expecting your consumer to get there. So you kind of go through this logic flow. And then on the next page, so you'll see here, the next 2 pages, there's a few Puma examples. There's none that look any like the others, like everyone looks different. I just think if we had this visualization with Visio, this would help us streamline the iconography of what things start to look like. So this is the same example, Puma example, just in terms of how they're laying out paid, owned, earned. And then the last one here, this is actually, I think, a very early version of Visio, before any of the icons were done. So just the team wanted to try and do it in there.
Do you know if that is available to download as of now without the customized?
It is.
So we can get that loaded on every computer?
Yeah. And we can also get the training, like Ben in the UK, said he's available.
Unbelievably intuitive. It's so easy.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
So at here.
Yeah.
And it was very easy. It's like a basic need for me.
Yeah.
So I encourage all of you to both work with your
We'll get it.
managers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it makes life a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. And there's even some sample icons that they have already created, like let's get that shared out.
I've got one that we did a project flow at one point, that how a project should work between us, activation, everybody, the length of time, and I did it on my home computer because I have it at home, and it makes it like what looks to be a very detailed ecosystem of relationships and times that you can create it in 10 minutes. It's unbelievably easy. So we'll be able to let everybody have that as an option across our work computers.
Absolutely. We actually downloaded it on a few computers when we had these worldwide workshops a few months ago, and we started talking about it, and I was like, I'd love to see it, because, if we're going to roll this out, I want to make sure it's useful. And they loaded it on a few laptops, so I know we have some licenses here, so I'm sure that's fine. Okay, moving on to measurement framework. This is step 5 or outcome 5. So I should say outcome 5 because there's 10 steps, 5 outcomes. It's really confusing. But this is about balancing our scorecard. So we want to make sure that when we're going into campaigns, like I feel like sometimes we forget this step. Like we should be thinking about our overall objectives, how we're setting up our KPIs, what they are, and then how we're delivering on them, right? So I think if we always rally back to that, sometimes it can help us determine what decisions we need to make. So how we're going to measure and improve. The team put together just a quick test checklist, I should say, in terms of, you start from agreeing on your objectives. I feel like this was very rudimentary for this team, but I think the priority being around, that sometimes there's some unknowns that we need to test, so make sure that that's part of the trials, right? And then as we're talking about measurement, we've been talking to the teams about, it could be interesting that if we're talking about this consumer journey, do we start to take a look at all of the tools that we have, and then is there a common set of metrics that we want to start to create? So I think we're going to be thinking through this as we're rolling out this CX optimization tool. Maybe there's some measurement that we want to put in there so that way we can make it easy for teams to have it be as part of a little quick checklist of, well, here are the KPIs, and then here's how we're delivering, and then here are the results that prove that out. So that was my presentation. I wanted to deliver it in 45 minutes because I figured I'd leave 15 minutes for questions, and I knew you guys were having lunch, so I wasn't sure if that was going to be delivered.
So I think we can field questions. One thing I know in the first 2 minutes, I'm sorry, but as we kick off trainings, we wanted to make this one completely inclusive. I know the next couple are really geared towards getting anyone on the team exclusively across the strategy teams up to speed on the basics of digital. This one was meant for everyone and wanted to both showcase 2.0 to the strategy team, but also give the activation teams a good understanding of how we're approaching things. So I think we're doing this now, whether or not we realize that or not. For strategy, we're doing it, and for activation, like with Marcel, it's still here. When we brought her in on Pump, we're in the act of understanding things, and we're getting crazy. And we do this. We don't follow it perfectly from a linear perspective. I think that's what's really great about the live ROI process that every agency has a proprietary strategy process. I like ours the most of the agencies that Scott and I have been at, which are quite a lot of them, because of how logical and linear it is, that you can, to Linda's earlier point, if it doesn't make sense for the campaign or the project or the client that you're working on, they're not necessarily, like, you don't have to check the box of one to get to two necessarily, that you can kind of move in and out of them. And so, to me, this seems like a really awesome evolution to it, and I'm excited for it to roll out. I'm excited to see the user experience for the custom tool. I think the custom tool is something that will have implications across the entirety of the business for us, for the entirety of the agency. I think that those are the kinds of things that when you business and are awesome. So I think it's very exciting. But anyway, just wanted to for you guys to see, really how we're approaching. I think we can flip to the slide that shows the steps?
Sure.
So I was looking at this, and I always think about, like, when does activation come into play, not just digitally, but when does any of our activation teams come into the process from a planning perspective or a strategy perspective? Like, this was made for the strategy team, if you will, but this is really kind of for everybody. And I don't think that there's any of these steps that can be done without the activation team.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Oh, there is? Yeah, and actually, this is awesome because it's the first time I've seen the live ROI in more detail. And being 6 months into my year, I will validate and also double down on Will's point that I almost would challenge the activation team to really employ these steps now that they've been shared, and obviously be prepared to learn more. There's what's coming. But if you think about it, frame the challenge. I would say, even if you're running search, like, framing the challenge is crucial for you there, all the way down to what are the KPIs and what are you delivering. If you take just a tactic like search, there's activation all across and end to end.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that there's any of these steps that should be done without both sides of the team, or all of the teams being involved. So as we frame that challenge, as we work through the active understanding process, historically that's been a strategy function, but it can't be done without the insights that can be provided by the activation teams and without working together to frame those issues. And so I just don't think that there are necessarily any clear delineation, and I don't think, as you think about each individual campaign or project we might work on, that it would ebb and flow the amounts that strategy would work on something, or activation, or how much they would work on it together. But as we frame the challenge, there may be an instance for a campaign where that's like 90% an activation function, and there's a chance that it's 90% strategy, or that's completely hand in hand, 50-50. I just think that generally we can't look at these things without each other. So I think it's exciting to have shared this with the activation teams, and that we can continue to, especially from September forward, make sure that we're thinking about every time we approach it.
This may sound funny, but I almost think like this has ancillary benefits like language. So to bring activation and strategy together, to Will's point, active understanding, I wouldn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
If I were to say meeting.
Yeah.
But now, if we're working along the same steps, using the same language that ladder up to a process and framework, I think that alleviates a lot of.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have. This is not something that's been shared on that side of the team before. So I think it's great to have done that. I think we have the same issue with the planner. When we talked to I think Alfred and team saw it, the first time that we started planning last year, when we were in the active understanding section of the deck, and they didn't really see it until they saw or get what we're saying, and they saw the project plan, and they kind of clearly delineated the sections as to how we're going to approach planning. So I think speaking of complementary is probably a great thing. With that, I will shut up and that's it. Maybe for me or Linda or Son or anybody else. Nada?
Anyone? Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, one question.
Okay. I would love Verizon to be part of building out the curriculum over the summer. I think it was easy for me to roll it out to the agency because I had sort of Verizon instilled in me for 10 years of, well, here's the way we did it on Verizon, but I didn't want it to only be the Verizon process. I wanted Chase to weigh in, and I wanted other client teams to weigh in to make sure that the language would work for them or the thought process, because I only knew the Verizon way. So I think it's the same thing of this 2.0 version. We used to have a step in here that said customize your activation approach, but we should be doing that. That should just happen, So we shouldn't have to say that. So we just felt like these were the 10 that we kind of prioritized to the top. But I would love not everyone has to participate, but it would be great to get some Verizon support just as we build it over the summer, because then instead of waiting to September, you guys can be taking it back and telling me, this way of organizing the organizing idea, like this process to go through, it takes too long for us, we cannot do that. This one works better for us, so we should embrace that. So it would be great to get some real-time feedback, and I think teams work best when they have examples, and as you can see, I don't have examples yet because we haven't really, launched it. I have a lot of VK examples, but sometimes it doesn't really translate to what we do here. So I just welcome any support.
Can I ask the group a question? Do you guys feel like there's anything missing from what Linda described? Like I threw out the loyalty. Anything's on the table,
Yeah,
right?
it hasn't been born yet,
Yeah.
so.
Like, I guess I have a question. This is an evolution, obviously, and clearly 2.0. The deliverables or the outputs, have they been NPS or Net Promoter scores by clients? Like, do they use their, is there a sort of feedback loop?
Yeah,
that goes
so,
into this?
so the 5 essential outputs, that's brand new. I brought this playbook. There's a live ROI playbook. Trying to get some copies. Literally, it's like a textbook. It's written like a textbook, and it kind of talks about how to get to this. But to your point, we haven't really vetted it through yet. But I think the feedback from our clients are going to determine whether we continue. Do we invest time in building out a brand experience map if the client doesn't really resonate with them? I think it will. The little feedback that we've gotten from Puma was this is great. I mean, it also put the creative agency on the hook because it was you're showing this to the client? Wait, we need to talk about all the assets that we think we need here. So it helped expedite some of those really difficult discussions with the creative teams before going to the client. So I think it definitely serves a purpose. The only one I'm a little uncertain about is the content strategy, and I think we're just going to have to work through it of, is this the right outcome or output, or is there another light version of it, if you will?
Or what campaigns does it apply to?
Yeah.
Or do we only need 3 of these for the campaign, because it's a smaller one, kind of thing, and Verizon and their particularity of certain things. And so we'll have to tailor it to our account and to the needs by campaign. But I think as we think about a logical way to approach planning and say, let's learn a bunch of things, let's organize those learnings and derive strategies from them, and then make sure that we are thinking across the board, across all touch points, all content platforms, and come up with an overarching kind of idea that is then really grounded in data and allows us to customize our channel mix and then measure it in ways as live as possible. It's really logical. So it's great, exciting. I think it helps just kind of, we have it posted on the wall kind of throughout the agency of think about these things, these steps that you take. I don't think you necessarily have to do every single one and every single output every time, and just got to make sure that we're from a strategic standpoint and from an activation standpoint, not strategy team, but overall approach to our jobs, keeping these things in mind.
Right, and the live aspect of what we do is all digitally led. So we've talked to Facebook. Facebook has their audience tool. And they had said, well, if you guys are workshopping with teams, that would be amazing if we could participate in the workshops. And as you guys are training on the Facebook tool, they could participate in that and help garner some insights that we can kind of bring back. It's the same thing with ComScore. ComScore has also said that they would come in and provide some additional customized training. So we're kind of taking them up on that. So anything from a digital-led, social-led, live aspect we are jumping on. It might not be something that we continue to do, but let's trial it through this training process and see what works. The only way we're going to know is if we're beta testing some of the stuff, and that's going to really keep us current. So we're excited about that. Thank you.